I split wood by the sound of the whir. Not the calendar dry pitch makes a different music under the mall than green sap. And in the hills you learn to hear what's coming before it crests the ridge. That morning the wind had a metallic taste. Like a penny on the tongue, like the sky had been rubbed raw. The creek ran low and fast from late summer melt. The alder leaves flashed their silver undersides in gusts. And the ravens rode the thermals like kites nobody held anymore. My name is Ione Halley. For 3 years I kept my distance from people and their disasters. I traded jars of wild honey and sharpened chainsaw. Chains for diesel and coffee at a general store that still wrote your tab on a clipboard. My cabin sat at the end of an unmarked spur off a logging road. 3 switchbacks above the remnants of a Cold War radar station that had long since been claimed by moss, swallow nests, and my stubborn little garden of kale and potatoes. I did not crave company. I craved quiet, and no one here argued with me. The plane, I always say, the plane. Like there's only ever been one in my life, slept in a barn I built from salvage beams. A 1962 Beechcraft D18, all rivets and ribs, that smelled like oil and leather and warm dust when the sun slid through the cracks in the boards, just right. Analog dials that never lied. A yoke worn smooth where hands had feared the worst and found the way through. I kept her loved but grounded. Keeping her ground-bound felt like an apology I owed the sky. No one in the valley knew my name. Up here you learn to answer to whatever keeps you from trouble. In town they called me the Bee Lady or the Hermit Pilot, depending on who you asked and how many beers they'd had. The name on my deed belonged to a trust. The name on my soul had stiffened into a silence I wore like a coat. I had left the grid after a day that rewired me, a day that taught me how thin the membrane is between control and catastrophe. It isn't a long story, and it isn't a short one either. It lives in the muscles of my hands and the way I walk around a problem twice before I touch it. If anyone forced me to say it, I'd only say, I put a bird down in a meadow that didn't want us, and I walked away carrying ghosts and a vow. I would never again be the instrument for someone else's emergency. The vow held until the day the mountain air began to ring. I heard it first as a whine under the wind. At first I thought it was a transformer blowout down in the valley. The grid eats itself sometimes when the sun throws a tantrum. But then it resolved into the lonely, fussy note of a piece of hardware I had packed in a Pelican case and duct taped shut the week I moved in. It was my satellite phone. The one I told myself I'd keep for earthquakes and nothing else. The one I had never once charged. It was ringing. I set them all down, retrieved the key from its hiding place in the rolled lip of the water tank, and dropped to my knees on the barn's gravel to drag the case from beneath the workbench. Duct tape squealed. Phone sighed. The phone lay there like a bad decision, black and patient. The screen, when it crawled to life, showed no missed calls, just the present one, slashing across the glass like a command. Priority. Halley, I don't. I said aloud to an empty barn, to my heartbeat, to whatever part of me was already raising her head like a dog hearing a patrol car far off in the city night. The phone rang again. I thumbed the green button because sometimes the hand betrays the mouth. Halley. My voice was the old voice, flat, clipped, the one I'd trained to cross cockpits in storms without having to shout. There was a click. Then another, like relays stepping down from orbit to atmosphere to me. A voice, not a person yet, spoke in that clean room cadence you only hear when something's already gone wrong. Authenticate, it said. Call sign Kestrel. Challenge phrase. I didn't move for a breath. Then the muscle memory sprang. This trap too. I will not fear the sky. Response phrase, the voice said. The sky fears me. There was a pause, then a very human exhale slid behind the machine. Ione, a woman said, and the way she used my name reached under my ribs. It's Gatehouse. We were told to call if the filter lit you. Gatehouse. The old continuity cell. Back when we were paid to imagine the day the lights went out everywhere at once, we practiced on paper in a windowless room under a decommissioned tower. We called ourselves Gay House because we never intended to go anywhere spectacular. Our job was to hold the door while the world stumbled through. The filter? I asked, though I already knew. The filter was a stubborn little algorithm we'd trained to crawl the ash of collapsed systems looking for a certain configuration of human and machine. You fed it a terror. What if the nets that hold us all together blinked, and it returned? A short list of who might still be able to keep analog birds in the air long enough to stitch one severed artery to another. We designed it for floods, fires, regional outages, not the end of everything. I'd left before anyone tested it in anger. It pinged you as the only viable pilot within our radius, with current instrument currency on full analog platforms and secure offline credentialing, she said. Most of the roster's dark, unreachable, or inside the wrong perimeters. You're above the datum, under the wind, and stupid enough to pick up, I said, which made her huff a laugh that sounded like she hadn't slept. Solar storm, she said, big and messy. Early models weren't wrong, but they were polite. This one's combing the hair of every satellite we love, and the geomagnetics are still snapping. Half the birds are in safe mode, the other half are lying. Ground systems are jury-rigging, but the big nets are noisy or quiet in the wrong ways. It's not just space weather, we think. We think someone's using the storm to cover their hands. Airspace is chaos. ATC went to voice in a lot of places, then lost those too when the backup grid stuttered. Fly-by-wire birds had dissonant sensor disagreements and put themselves on the ground, some neatly, some not. Even where they're up, the coms are full of ghosts. The only dependable platforms are ugly, old, and thick-skinned. We don't have enough hands to fly them. The filter says your hands still remember. The barn drooped toward me like it wanted to hear the answer. I looked at my beaches, blunt nose, and thought about promises. I left for a reason. I know, the woman said. I wouldn't call if I had anyone else. I can't say more on an open channel. Meet? I don't meet. You do today. There was iron under the tired in her voice. I'll put 2 trucks at the old fire base at mile marker 22. You know the one, 1 hour. If you don't show, I'll assume you threw this phone in the creek, and I'll try someone else I don't have. Please, Ione. The Ravens argued above the barn, as if they had opinions about duty. I pinched the bridge of my nose until the ache sharpened into something I could stand. 1 hour, I said, and killed the line before the plea could turn into a promise I'd regret. I moved like you move when you're leaving a place you might not come back to, practical but reverent. I topped the bees' sugar water and slid extra frames into the hives, because the hive knows when you're gone. I bled the water filter and latched the barn door from the inside, then from the outside, because you honor machines you've loved. I ran a hand along the beach's flank and thought about turbine hum and screams in silence. Then I got in the truck and drove. The old fire base had been a staging area for smoke jumpers back when the state had money for Audacity. Now it was a rectangle of cracked asphalt, a tower with missing windows, and a view that could stun you if you weren't careful. The 2 trucks were there when I came around the last bend. No markings, antennas with too many joints. A woman in a baseball cap and a man with a clipboard stood in the lee of the tailgate like they were trying not to spook a deer. The woman took off her cap as I rolled to a stop. She had county hair and federal posture. Her eyes were red but alert. Hallie? I nodded. She put out her hand. Greer, she said. We talked. This is Rourke. Rourke's handshake was the brisk kind that confirms a human and moves on. He handed me a folder that wasn't a folder at all, a mylar envelope that felt like it had been printed on demand with the ink still drying. Read, he said. I opened it and found a map that wasn't a map. Lines like veins, bubbles of controlled airspace. scratched out sectors, and a red line drawn from nothing to necessity. There was also a sheet with a typed brief stripped of the niceties that make people feel better about how bad things are. The words vibrated with urgency I could taste. Mission, Shepard Key, Objective. Fly Cryogenic Payload Alpha, White Box, from Observatory Ridge Lab, Lat Lan to St. Bridget Medical Center. Portland OR. Arrival NLT, nitrogen monoxide later than 04000. Purpose. White box contains master seed keys for reboot, verification of compromised hospital network, and 2 regional water treatment plant control modules, current systems. Locked out due to geomagnetic correlative authentication collapse and coincident hostile activity. Manual override requires physical key delivery. Delay. Beyond 0400L will compound casualties in critical care and municipal water safe zones. Platform. CAS A200, 12-200. Analog low avionics, callsign MUL 6. Aircraft in Hangar B. Red Bluff Municipal. Fuel full. Payload secure locks at origin. Keys provided upon authentication. Nav. Expect degraded GPPS WAAS. Rely on VOR DME, where available. Expect spoofed signals, primary recommended, dead reckoning. Visual nav plus paper charts enclosed, weather marginal coastal, stratus and valley fog, winds variable, threat, civil unrest limited, airspace deconflict, desk degraded, automated counter-UAS systems, QS. Uncivic buildings may misidentify low RCS analog CFT as hostile under spoof transponder returns. Avoid core downtown envelopes. Use river corridors if necessary. Crew assigned. Halley. Additional. Optional comms tech. Authorities. State. EOC Region X. DHS CIS continuity. Row. Minimum necessary force. Avoid overflight of populated protest areas. I set the packet on the tailgate, put both hands on the metal, and felt the cold sink through my palms into bone. No, I said automatically, the word a reflex against the tidal pull of the map. The brief, the stupid red line that knew my hands as well as I did. I'm not your hero. Greer didn't flinch. I don't need a hero. I need a pilot who can fly a sewing machine blindfolded with a map drawn in crayon. The white box keys get to St. Bridget by 4. Ventilators spin back up, bypass modules. Get authenticated, and they restart the chlorine pumps before the dirty water hitting taps becomes a second disaster. If the certification isn't there in person, the safeties don't lift. Protocol, not cruelty. Why me, I said, and hated the whine of it. Because the filter says so, Rourke said without apology. Because when we asked the states, old-timers who could ride an aviocar through a valley with the sky turned sideways, they said your name, and then they said we probably wouldn't find you. Because there's a narrow list of people who can do this without spending all night typing angry emails at a dead avionics suite. He gestured at the horizon, where the late light was already turning blue. Because we're out of night. What about a TC? I said, still looking for the exit ramp. If I get under the stratus and run the gorge, I'll be Nordo half the way. ATC is triging heavy metal corridors where they can domestic and military. We've got a guy with a radio and a stack of paper in Salem trying to keep prop planes from arguing with each other. He'll be your voice when you can reach him. Greer's eyes softened but didn't blink. Look, I know you have your reasons. Someone told me you took a vow after Cascade 1. I didn't ask what happened. I just asked if you died. They said no. Then they said you were the only one who didn't. Cascade 1. The name landed on the asphalt like a hammer. I gripped the tailgate until the metal creaked. I put that bird down and I walked away, I said, which wasn't an answer and was the only one I had. I swore I wouldn't let the machine inside me make choices for me again. This isn't the machine, Greer said. It's me, asking, and a lot of people who will never know your name, breathing or not. Silence flared white around us. Ravens wrote black cursive. Across it, somewhere down the mountain, a dog barked twice, paused, then barked again like news traveling by paw. I found my breath standing like a stranger a few feet behind me and said to it, "Well?" "Show me the plane," I said, and Greer's shoulders dropped like someone had loosened the rope around her chest. Red Bluff was a scrubby little field crouched between a river, the color of old beer, and a grid of streets that looked like a circuit board melted slightly in the sun. The hangars rolled up reluctantly, as if they were tired of this too. Mule 6 sat there with her blunt nose and square shoulders like the world's bravest shoebox. I had flown her cousins to oil fields and riverside strips, and once to a dirt track in the Yucatan where the kids ran alongside and laughed like flight was a magic trick instead of commerce. The Casa 212 isn't pretty, it's competent. She hauls, she takes insults in stride, she forgives. If you love airplanes, you never stand in front of one you might fly without a certain ritual of the eyes. Every line, every rivet, every seam is a sentence in a language you learned before you knew you were learning it. I walked her like a prayer, and she answered like a confession. Fuel capped, tires honest, control surfaces hinged with intention, not hope. Pitot covers off, panels buttoned. Someone had done this right in the middle of a wrong day. Inside, she smelled like hydraulic fluid and faint cinnamon. A mechanic had left a thermos on the dash like a gift for midnight. The panel was a museum in the best way: steam gauges, needle and ball. Compass that wasn't lying because it had never learned how. Radios that would talk if the sky would listen. And a transponder I suspected would be more trouble than it was worth with the nets spitting ghosts. I ran a finger along the glare shield and found a nick shaped like the state of Colorado. I told myself not to take that as an omen. The loadmaster boy, really, with a jaw he hadn't learned how to ride, yet hovered near the ramp with a crate that exhaled elegantly cold breaths into the hangar. The white box didn't look like anything. It looked like an expensive cooler for a picnic where no one would ever laugh. It had a tamper seal with an embossed hawk and a plastic sleeve for the paper manifest, because even in the end, time somebody tapes the right paperwork to the right thing. "You Hallie?" the boy asked, as if we might all still be swapped out for better versions at the last second. "Unfortunately," I said. "You the load?" He flushed. "Ma'am, I'm Devin. I helped integrate the cryo. The box is shock isolated and rated for a rough ride. Coolant good for 9 hours once we break this seal. Port here if we've got a ground unit at St. Bridget when we arrive. They told me not to say what it is exactly. That it didn't matter as long as it gets where it's going. Keys unlock at origin?" He nodded and produced a small hard case with a lamination I recognized as the kind of badge that gets you past doors, not because anyone knows you, but because the system does. The irony of that stung. Greer came up the ramp with a canvas bag and a look on her face people get when they're trying to fake calm for someone they respect too much to lie to. "Charts," she said, handing me the bag. "Printed 2 hours ago from whatever NOAA still thinks is true. VFR sectionals, low en route. IFR gorge corridor plates. We've marked checkpoints where we think human ears are still on. You'll run a valley route to the ridge, hop the load, then snake down the Columbia and slip into Portland following the river because the city's CUS nets are trigger happy. ATC's got a skeleton crew at Troutdale on a generator. They can throw you a green light for final if the city grid doesn't wake up by then. Communications Rourke will sit in the right seat if you permit him. He's not a pilot, but he can run the radio like a sewing machine, and he won't touch anything else. He'll take your notes if you talk. He'll shut up if you don't." I looked at Rourke, who lifted his hand slightly. "I've been told I have the vibe of a tree," he said. "I can also pour coffee without spilling in turbulence." "Fine," I said. I didn't want a human in my quiet. I wanted a mouth who could be my mouth when I needed mine for flying. "What about the transponder?" I asked, tapping the black box with its grudging little screen. If I squawk, I could light up all the wrong rooms. Your call, Greer said. The nets are dirty. Some towers are spitting 7500s at everything, with a signal just because they're confused. Keep it dark and you're a ghost. Light it and you're a target or a friend depending on who's looking. Use your eyes. Use the river. And Hallie, she paused. The part that wasn't steel flickered. I only ever wanted to be a librarian. I memorized the Dewey Decimal System as a party trick. I don't like calling people up out of their quiet and handing them the sharp end of the world. But this is the work, and I'm asking you to cut a path through the dark and then go back to your garden as if you never left. Can you do that? If I get the chance, I said, which was the truest thing I could give. We pushed. The mule felt heavier than her number's urgency loads iron into the air. Rourke strapped in with the efficient resignation of someone who had learned long ago which of his fears were useful tools and which were just furniture. Devon backed the white box into her seat and ratcheted the straps until the box and the plane were practically married. He whispered something to the crate that might have been a blessing disguised as data. I pretended not to hear. Night tumbled in like someone taking the sun by the ankles and yanking. The hangar doors gaped. Out on the apron, a fuel truck idled, like a mechanical cow chewing a problem cud. My hands shook once, a small internal earthquake that rattled against the bones then fell still. I stared at them until they remembered themselves. Checklist, I said, and the old catechism unrolled. Beads through fingers, every item a sacrament. Batteries on, magnetos on, mixture rich, props full, throttle cracked. Prime, clear prop, left engine, right engine. The beach had always started like a woman who agreed to try again, drawing breath despite what yesterday had done to her. The mule started like an animal you had to bribe. She coughed, spat, caught, then smoothed into a hum that vibrated my bones. Into alignment. In the right seat, Rourke became the height of a number 2 pencil. He held the laminated check like a Bible and watched my hands like he was learning a spell. Taxi, I said. The yellow line under the nose wheel felt like a leash. The wind had shifted to playful Mina little tail, a little cross. At the hold short, I stopped and listened. The sky, when you really listen, has a texture. On good nights it's velvet. On bad nights it's tin. Tonight it was something in between, like someone had thrown a handful of BBs across a snare drum. I keyed the radio. Red Bluff traffic, Mule 6. Departing runway 16, northeast bound. Anyone awake out there? We're looking for a friendly voice. Static answered, then a man whose vowels tasted like coffee and oath. Mule 6, this is Salem Interim. Friendly, sure. You heading to the ridge? Affirm. Watch your VORs. We're getting spoof echo off Shasta. Keep your eyes and your map honest. Report ridge departure, and I'll try to open the corridor. Godspeed, Mule 6. Godspeed. I hadn't believed in speed in a long time. I believed in angles and patience. And keeping your numbers. I lined up, held the brakes, ran the engines up to make sure no cylinder had decided today was his day to die, and let the machine talk to me in a language nobody teaches out loud. It said, I will do what you ask if you ask me right. Rolling. I said, and we were. Acceleration isn't a feeling, it's a decision your organs make. The runway lights were dull candles in a wind. The nose lifted and the tail let go, and we were airborne. The black rectangle falling away, the town a broken circuit below, and the sky suddenly huge and full of teeth. Rourke said nothing. I felt him become thinner beside me until he was mostly intention. Climb to 8, nose at a practical angle, airspeed where war and weather meet for coffee. The first few minutes out of a field at night are the distance between what you think you can do and what you actually will. I breathed through the space where fear tries to write itself as poetry. The mule hummed like a promise someone made. Me in another life, The ridge sat on a plateau that liked to pretend it was a mountain. The lab's strip was narrow and gravel, with rabbit holes at both ends like Mother Nature had her opinions about ambition. The wind tunneled weird, as it always did up there, and the approach felt like threading a needle sewn into a twitching. Animal, white lights, no poppy, Rourke narrated quietly because he wanted to be useful. Wind at 3-5 from your left quarter. Terrain grabs your wing if you let it. I am shutting up now. Keep talking if I stop, I said, and the mule skipped once, then settled. Tires barking at the gravel like they had a complaint I couldn't resolve. They rolled the door, not because electricity condescended to help, but because 5 people with strong backs can do what civilization sometimes cannot. The white box moved from the hangar to our belly like a heart transplant no one had thought they'd be doing tonight. A woman in a lab coat with a stain at one pocket, supervised with a stillness I recognized from my own mirror on bad days. She had a lanyard with an ID that called her Dr. B. Key, 2 letters and a smudge, as if the world had already decided exactly how much identity she could afford. You're late, she said without heat. Not you, the night. Are we still inside the 9-hour window if we're wheels up in 5? I asked. If nothing else goes wrong, she said, and her smile was as crooked as mine. Keys, she added, and held out a palm. I placed the hard case into it, and she tucked it under her arm like a clutch ammo box. I'll walk you through the seal. We did the dance. My fingerprint, her code. 2 physical keys turned at the same time, the white fog sigh as the lock recognized that sometimes a protocol matters more than a person's view of it. The box stayed shut. This wasn't the kind of key that opened anything you could drop. It was a cryptographic heirloom married to a specific piece of metal locked into the white box's spine. She sealed it again with new tamper tape and initialed the corner with a Sharpie that made a sound like a zipper. Dr. B, I said, what's in there? Enough truth to argue down a liar, she said. A heartbeat for the dead network. We built it for exactly this, which is both gratifying and terrifying. If you get it to St. Bridget, the ICU stops being field medicine in the dark. If you get it to the water plants, kids stop getting sick from what comes out of their taps tomorrow morning. If you don't, she didn't finish. Scientists know when to let gravity speak for them. A runner popped his head in the door. Winds. Picking up, he said, a little too brightly. And we're hearing chatter about downtown's counter-drone nets, toggling to full autonomous on some rooftops. Somebody's feeding them bad transponder ghosts, and the software is doing its anxious best. He looked at me like I could fix software by glowering at it. We'll be under the rooftops in the river if we have to be, I said. Thank you. Doctor. B touched the white box with her fingertips the way people touch a loved one's shoulder before surgery. Go, she said. Please. Copy, I said, because sometimes your mouth can only carry the most ordinary words when the important things won't fit. We turned and rolled with the kind of hurry that never tips into panic because panic is a liar. At the threshold I held and stared into the black hoping it would blink. It did not. Rourke, I said, if we lose comms completely, you hold the paper and remind me I'm a mammal. I'll do the rest. I have been a mammal all my life, he said. I'm good at it. Takeoff at the ridge at night is a math problem with teeth. Elevation, density, altitude, pretending to be a different number than the thermometer says. Crosswind trying to tuck you into the brush like a bad mother. The mule did what she was told because she had always been the kind of plane that respects. A firm voice. We were airborne, nose low enough to earn our airspeed. Engines had a setting that would not shame us later. Above us the aurora was a dirty veil slapped across a face. The green wasn't pretty. It was angry, like the sky was bruised. I felt it in the needles of the compass twitching. The VORS tried to lie sweetly to me. I shut them up and flew the map I trusted most: river, ridgeline, the specific darkness. Where a town should be, but wasn't because nobody had power to make light. I held the mule as if I were teaching her to dance as the gorge rose to meet us like a throat swallowing. Salem interim to Mule 6, you copy? The radio's voice teased the edge of audibility like a shy animal coming close for salt. Affirm, I said. Mule 6 approaching Y East sector, descending to follow the river. Request corridor green lanes for St. Bridget approach on Troutdale, or river straight in. Roger that mule, we're coordinating with Trout in the city. Heads up, automated clever boxes on some rooftops are an active scan. We've got a monkey wrench trying to spoof hostiles with transponder phantoms. Keep your squawk dark unless you want a bad conversation. He paused. Also, this is unofficial. Somebody's hitting us on guard with ghost maydays. Don't chase. It's bait. The gorge makes its own weather. Down there at night, it can be clear and full of teeth you never see. I eased us under a ceiling that wobbled like a drunk story. The river shone pewter. Fog draped itself in the low spots like a creature waiting to be fed. In the right seat, Rourke's pencil ticked on paper as if counting might keep us alive. Tell me something true, I said before I realized I needed to hear a human voice that wasn't mine. Rourke blinked. I once wanted to be a jazz drummer, he said, then added, it did not take. I once wanted to be a tour guide at an aviation museum, I said. Tell kids about planes and then send them home to have regular lives. I thought if I put enough distance between my hands and the sky, I could live without them. How'd that go? He asked, soft around the hazard. I built a barn in the woods and pretended time wasn't a thing that happened to me, I said. Then someone rang a phone I buried under tools. We came around a bend where the cliffs lean in, as if they want to whisper in your oil cooler, and the radio hissed with the kind of life that sounds like dying. Mayday, 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 a voice said, high and bright and wrong. Cessna. 7-2, then a gargle, then a different voice overlaying the first like bad dubbing. Down in the water, 2 souls, help. The hair on my arm stood up even though I had told it not to. Guard bait, Rourke breathed. Salem said. Or somebody real, I said. And then I hated being human enough to have that argument with myself, while a river coiled under our belly like a live wire. I held course and speed, chewing. The river with prop wash, eyes combing the water and the rock for anything that moved besides us. The mule's nose twitched against an eddy. We were a bright rectangle in a dark throat. 2 flares winked to life on a far bank, almost as if the gorge had decided to grow eyes. Not red amber, not distress guidance. A pattern I hadn't seen since a training exercise I had half resented a decade ago. What the hell is that? Rourke said. Old river pilots, I said, my mouth already dry. When the radio goes to ghosts, you light the bank. That's not guard bait. That's a human. Do we divert? We're already low, I said. If I stretch left anymore, the cliff eats my wing. If I climb to circle, the clever boxes get nervous. If I ignore flares I know how to read, I don't recognize myself. I tasted metal. Hold on. We skated 10 seconds into a calculus no one would grade us on, except the dead. I nudged the mule 2 degrees to the right, felt the wind try to tug my tail like a child insisting on being carried, then corrected with a grace I didn't know I had kept. The river opened a little. The far bank's gravel bar gleamed like teeth. Between the flares, a shape low, black, wrong in the water. Not a plane. A truck. Then a second shape of figure waving both arms with the frenetic commitment of someone who had already totaled the possible outcomes and found the one. That required faith. What the Rourke started. Flood rollover, I said. Someone tried to ford where the charts say you shouldn't when the gauges lie. We have no winch, no rope, nothing but eyes. My brain threw inventory at me like a panicked clerk. A survival kit with flares of our own, a med roll we could Throw from the door, a plane that could not land here, a heart that refused to forget that I had once promised myself to be done with this. The figure on the bank pointed downstream, jabbed their arm toward a bend where the river turned cruel. I banked to see and saw it, a shape caught in a snag, splayed in the current, a person. Too small, child small. Jesus, Rourke said. We can't put it down, I said, the words like stones in my mouth. If we slow any more, the air will. Let go, we don't have SAR gear. We do have a radio and a map and a mouth. Salem Interim, Mule 6 on River Corridor, 10 miles east of Trout, possible flood victim. Coordinates, I said, and spat numbers as fast as my eyes and brain could dance while my hands kept the mule from faulting us into the rock. Get ground SAR at mile marker. I found the scrap of road, the little cracked line, the place where a county number held on like moss. 12. One adult, one child, one vehicle overturned, child pinned in eddy near downed alder. Advise we can mark with flare and continue. We cannot stop. Copy, Salem said, and I could hear him already typing with 4 fingers into a system that might be taped together with prayer. Bless you, Mule 6. Don't bless me yet, I said, and popped our own flare into the night white to say come here now, then pitched forward, like we'd never been near anything but our own problem. The figure on the bank threw both arms into the air. In a hallelujah I didn't deserve. I wanted to stop. I didn't. The mule felt heavier again. The white box slept in our belly like a reason I would have to keep saying aloud until I believed it. St. Brigid Tower. Rourke tried on the next frequency, but the tower didn't so much answer as wheeze. Down in the city, the dark wasn't. Uniform. Here and there a building hummed like a stubborn tooth. The hospitals had backup generation. The neighborhoods breathed shallowly. Somewhere a siren learned it could sing without accompaniment. We stayed on the river until the bridges began. The first was a black stripe with flickers of hazard lights where someone with more courage than sense had parked trucks to keep other people from trying to cross. The next wore string lights like a ghost festival. The third had a box on its hip that looked like it wanted to judge me personally. That one, Rourke said softly, pointing with his pencil. Cayuse Nest, the clever box. It looked like a small shipping container had mated with a filing cabinet. I'd seen the brochures. Autonomous drone interdiction for municipal roofs. Smart enough to judge friend from pest. Quick enough to knock a quadcopter out of the sky before it filmed your mayor falling down drunk at a ribbon cutting. Tonight its logic tree was being watered with poison. Its sensor swept. The little Jimble's word. We were low and quiet and not wearing a transponder that agreed with anyone. If it had been allowed to grow a brain, it might decide we were a problem. Keep it to the river, I said. Wires at 3 o'clock. I will owe someone flowers if we live through this. My voice was very calm, the voice I used when I had to tell frightened people to breathe through pain. The radio whispered again. A different voice now, no call sign, no respect. Unidentified low-flying twin prop approaching downtown. Squawk identity, or you will be treated as hostile by autonomous municipal defense, per emergency order. Say again with authority and call back, Rourke said. Bless him, because bureaucracy likes to be asked to show its ID. Nothing. Squawk identity, or be engaged. The accent was a little wrong. I had the feral thought that the voice was being puppeted from somewhere far away, by someone who had found a wire exposed by the storm, and stuck a finger in it, just to watch a city jump. I kept the mule over the Tickasee River, lower now, so low the water's texture had opinions about it. The bridges stacked, each with its own little teeth. The city ahead slumped dark except for St. Brigid's pale island of light, a stubborn square where the generators were holding their breath. We needed the pad behind it, the ambulance bay, the crew waiting with a ground unit to catch the cryo while it still had its temper. The path between us and there was a tunnel with a mean streak. Hold us steady, I told the plane and perhaps God. We are not here to fight software. At the same moment, three things happened. The clever box on the bridge whined into a higher gear as if someone had goosed it. Rourke's radio coughed an urgent cough like a man trying not to yell, and the night ahead of us lit with a tracery of White Line's anti-drone interceptors stitching air in a pattern meant to dissuade toys, not hurt airplanes, but if you fly a sewing pattern wrong, you still get sewn. Right, I said, meaning left. The way pilots mean it when the world flips and your hands have to listen faster than your language can. I slid us sideways under the first line of light, felt the pressure waves slap our fuselage like the river had leapt up to object, then leveled just enough to keep the water from becoming a mirror that would kiss us to death. St. Bridget, if you can hear, we are on the river for the ambulance bay, Rourke said into a frequency that might as well have been a prayer. We will not climb, we will not squawk. We will not fail to bring your heart back to you. Unidentified engage. The puppet voice said, almost bored. The clever box clicked open like a jaw. The mule has this dignity, even when she's being stupid. She doesn't do violence. She does solutions. But sometimes the solution is to make yourself thinner than the problem and slide through. The Willamette River looked like a black ribbon somebody had frayed along the edges. The bridge ahead had a belly I could almost fit under if the world kept its hands to itself. Ione. Rourke said, my name in his mouth for the first time, bare of rank, history, filter. What are you going to do? I'm going to go under it, I said, because sometimes the only way out is straight through the thing that thinks it can stop you. Is that? No. I said, it isn't, and dropped the nose toward the water until it filled the windshield, until the bridge's girders were a jaw I could count teeth on, until the mule began to shake in that way that says, you and I are going to have to trust each other more than we planned tonight. There was no time for hope. There was only the correct angle in the throttle where it belonged, and the certainty that the night was not entitled to keep what it wanted. The interceptors traced lines behind us that chewed the air into quilt squares. The clever box's mouth flowered another ugly blossom of light. The ambulance bay's roof glowed ahead like a small rational island. I set us on the river's seam and held. A siren wailed somewhere, the sound stretching as if it had to run to catch us. The girders opened like ribs. The mule's belly kissed a deeper pocket of air that smelled wet and electric. The altimeter whispered a number I refused to share with any living soul. Rourke made a sound like a wordless prayer swallowed itself. We cleared the shadow by the thickness of the day I had been born. Something bright hit the water behind us and made it leap. A slap of light that wrote its name on the river's skin, and then unwrote it. Ahead, St. Bridget's ambulance bay door cracked like an eyelid waking to a remembered promise. I hauled the mule's nose just enough to climb a thumb's width over the lip of the roofline. The plane moaned like a floor in an old house where people have danced too hard. The radio went white with noise and then, clear as a bell in a church you don't believe in, but enter anyway because the door is open, a woman's voice said, Mole. 6, this is St. Bridget. We see you. You are insane. We love you. Bring us our heart. I opened my mouth to answer, and the windshield blew white. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. And the windshield blew white. Not a crack, not a bird, not ice. A sheet of blinding foam arced from the bridge box like a squirted lie and smacked across the glass with a sound that hit me in the teeth. The world vanished. My cockpit became a small lit room full of numbers and breath. Eyes. Rourke shouted, even though he wasn't touching anything. I've got it, I said. I had the attitude indicator steady, the altimeter bleeding small in the way. I was allowing the airspeed honest, the compass twitching like a needle tasting lightning. I had the river by memory, the texture of it under the belly, the sound of it in the yoke. I could not see forward. That would have to be someone else's problem. I didn't have anyone else. Casa wipers are not ornaments. I thumbed the stock, and the blades dragged once, twice, smearing the white into a milk the knight couldn't drink. The spray unit coughed up the last of whatever glycol a kinder week had left, streaked tracks thinner than trust. The center panel stayed blind. I cracked my left side window, a finger width, and a slap of wet air took my skin in its teeth. I leaned my face into that sliver of world and found a slice of bridge rib sliding past, so close I could have read the rivet heads if I'd had a poet's eyes. St. Bridget. We've taken a foam strike on the windscreen, Rourke said, in the voice you use when you don't have time to be scared. We're maintaining corridor. We cannot take your pad direct. Request Troutdale Green and a corridor freeze on the clever boxes along the river for 30 seconds. Copy, Mule 6, the woman answered, a little breathless, a little furious. We're pushing a kill command to municipal nets now. Troutdale says yes. Corridor freeze in 3-2-1 hold that river like it's your religion. I was never good at religion, I said. The white box chimed softly in the cargo. Hold like a sleeping animal, reminding us it had a schedule. We skimmed the last belly of the bridge, slid past the clever box's whirring head as its lights went off like someone had put hands over its eyes, and then we were clean, the hospital's roof shining at my 5 o'clock like a promise I wasn't allowed to keep from the sky. Troutdale Tower, I said. Mule 6, River Corridor 3 eastbound. Request straight into the long pavement, short roll, ambulances on the fence. We are blind ahead, partial side visibility only. Mule 6 Trout, we've got runway 20 lit and lonely. A voice said that had smoked too much and worried more. Wind to 20 at 5. Foam and sweepers standing by for your glass. Got a convoy staged. You'll have a follow car to the fence. I don't know what you are, but you've got the kind of friends that wake up my boss. Cleared to land. 20. God keep you out of the river. God's busy, I said under my breath, and eased the mule toward the airport lights sliding into my small left-hand world. I've flown instruments in worse soup. Night plus partial blindness is a different soup. You take one more ladle of humility with it. I flew the needle and the numbers, and the sense memory of how long it takes this airplane to do what you ask when you ask it right. Rourke read out distance like a rosary. 1 mile. 8/10, 6. I'll flare when it feels like home, I said. The foam streaks had thinned under stubborn wipers. A slot opened ahead, grudging as a bureaucrat at 5 minutes to closing. The runway came up at me with the particular generosity of pavement that has watched a lot of pilots make decisions they weren't sure about. I brought the nose up like I was apologizing for something I would do again, and the wheels kissed with a chirp that wasn't pretty, but was ours. Welcome, Mule 6, Trout said, and there was something like a laugh under the smoke. Exit left. Follow the red pickup. Try not to run him over. He's new. We rolled, the mule grumbling as if insulted by the ground. The side window sent me a slap of diesel in night and somebody's cheap cologne. Rourke's pencil went. Still, you good? He said. Ask me when my hands stop, I said. They didn't. They had learned to keep moving when the rest of me wanted to sit puddled on the floor and feel everything. I taxied like I had one eye shut, which I did, and the red pickup with its rooftop flasher zigzagged like a nervous terrier. We met a line of vehicles at the fence. 2 ambulances, a white van with a city seal taped to its door with painter's tape, 3 people in scrubs, one in a t-shirt and pajama pants under a jacket, a security guard with a baton he didn't look line of sight comfortable with. I set the brake and killed the left engine, then the right, because you shut down the way you started, with attention. The sudden quiet after prop wash is like a confession booth. Everything you've been too loud to hear has been waiting in there. I unlatched and the night fell in ground, came up the ramp like a tide with purpose. Devon's shock mount straps were poetry. The white box rolled to the lip and paused like a cat deciding if it trusted the stairs. Dr. Ajaya Badge flashed the name. The face wore both exhaustion and command took position by the ramp with a clipboard that was a formality. In a world that had skipped ceremony all evening, you Ione? She asked, eyes sharp and warm at once. Usually, I said. Thank you for being on the planet tonight, she said simply, and then pointed at the white box. We've got the ground unit. We'll have to load it in the van. The bay's 3 blocks. Net wants to be a hero instead of a villain tonight. Our direct telemetry's still mush. You stay with your bird. I almost said I wasn't a hero. The words had been sitting on my tongue like a splinter all night, ready to appear at slightest provocation. I didn't say them. I watched them roll the white box into the van and lock it in like it was a newborn that screamed in numbers. Rourke stood at my shoulder with his hands folded, the tree again, light catching the few gray hairs that had been waiting for a crisis to announce themselves. Go, Ajay told her crew, then turned to me. You may be done, pilot. Or you may hate me in 5 minutes. Depends on how fast my network stands up. What else? I asked, because asking is easier than waiting. Water, she said, and the word tilted the ground under us. We've got Bull Run source, but the city grid's choking, and the West Plant Cecile is locked out. Chlorination's running blind. If it stays blind, we boil water for 250,000 people by noon and pray everyone listens. If it goes wrong, we make them sick. My people have the hospital keys. They'll try to sign the plant modules from our clean room when we're steady. If that fails, someone has to take a second key physically to the West Plant control room and feed it to a box that doesn't understand begging. Greer slid out of the night like she'd been hiding in it. Her hat was gone. Her hair was pinned with something that looked like it had once held a report together. I didn't want to say it before your wheels were on the ground, she said. And she held up a second mylar envelope, heavier, meaner. Ridge had twin for the plant. We had to split them because paranoia sometimes earns its keep. Hospital first, plant second. If Ajay can't handshake remotely in 5, we need you to take this to Northgate water treatment. Northgate, I repeated, and the map in my head found the place West Bank, tucked under a shoulder of hill. A long rectangle of reservoirs with lids like sleeping giants. A control building that would be a maze of smell and hum and good. Times and tonight would feel like a heart without a brain. Between us and it were bridges that might have opinions and a river that wore its own moods like a drunk. How much time? I asked. Hospital handshake in 4 minutes if God is a network engineer, Ajay said. If not, the plant has a window of 90. After that, even if we fix the lockout, the error states propagate. We have to dump reservoirs. We don't have enough bottled stock to cover. We are fragile. I looked at the mule's face, the blind windshield, the stubborn wipers stalled mid-stroke like a painting of effort. Flying her with one eye had been a trick. Doing it again under municipal defense boxes. Having a mood might be a parlor trick that killed other people. Can you wash the glass? I asked Trout's red pickup, which I knew was not a person, but trucks have Wranglers and Wranglers have hoses. In a minute, a pair of field crew in yellow reflective coats were up ladders with buckets and squeegees like old-time window washers on a dare. The foam was both soap and glue. It peeled under their blades in stubborn sheets that slapped the tarmac with wet sounds. Each cleared oval was a lung. Rourke stood with his headset around his neck, listening to a frequency I couldn't hear. St. Bridget just said, "Green heartbeat detected," he relayed, eyes sudden bright. They're pushing the sign. To the plant wrappers now. Ajay says give her 90 seconds. 90, I said, and for 90 seconds, I let myself feel something like hope. I watched the hospital van's taillights bounce out of the lot and vanish toward the city lights that weren't there. Watched a woman in scrubs realize she'd been clenching a fist for an hour and force each finger to open. Watched one of the field crew look up at the stars and then glance away like he was embarrassed the sky could still do that when we were busy. At 60 seconds, Rourke said, "Attempt 1 rejected. They're trying a narrower handshake. Ghost traffic is still loud." At 80 he said, "Attempt 2, and didn't need to finish because Ajay was already moving toward us with the expression of someone married to a failing thing that must be carried across a river by hand. "Okay," she said, "I'm sorry, we can't guarantee the ring to plant sign over air. We think someone's still playing ventriloquist with our pings. We need a person to walk the key across a threshold and make the box believe." I held out my hand for the mylar. Greer didn't hand it over yet. "This is uglier," she said. "You'll route west, stay low. Bridges will be as rude as they were. Maybe ruder if our kill commands don't stick. You'll land on a strip that thinks it's a road west field 2 miles from the plant. Or, if you're ready to scare some deer, there's a service lane that used to take deliveries. It's wide enough if the mule behaves like she owes. You money, your call. Rourke goes with you. At the plant, a man named Valdez will meet you at the chain link with a bolt cutter and a face that says he's slept on the floor there before. He knows the box. He'll open the door. You'll feed. The key, he'll do the dance. Then you'll leave before anyone has time to ask you for a miracle number 2. "Copy," I said, though she hadn't asked if I was going. "Fuel?" "Half tanks," Trout answered without being asked, like a voice from a confessional booth that hears everyone's sins eventually. "We can top you with a hand pump from drums if you don't mind smelling like high school shop class." "Do it," I said. "I don't mind smelling like anything if smelling like it keeps me from falling out of the sky." The pump whined, the hose shivered, the numbers on the old mechanical dial twitched like nervous birds. "Ajay," I said as she kept pace beside the refuelers, "when this stands up, when your sign makes the plant remember what clean looks like, who breathes? Easier?" "Kids first," she said, "then the old. Then everyone who forgot until tonight that water is not a miracle. Go." We went. Taxi. Wipers canted at dutiful angles. Foam ghosted at the edges, but my forward world was back in slices that made a hole if you had faith. Rourke strapped in with his pencil tucked behind his ear like a carpenter who'd been handed an organ to tune. I ran the checklist aloud because I needed to hear the liturgy. The mule obliged by acting like a thing designed by people who believed in redundancy and forgiveness. "Trout. Mule 6, departing to the west for Northgate," I said. "Request you ask the city to keep their clever boxes napping along the Willamette corridor for 3 minutes." "Mule 6, Trout," we asked, came the answer. "Some are sleeping. Some are rolling over. Some said they had a headache and wanted a glass of water. Be smart out there." "I'll be something," I said, and shoved the throttles until the mule and I agreed we were going to stop pretending we didn't want to fly. We lifted into the night like a second chance being rude to gravity and banked toward the river. And the west. Beneath us, streetlights flickered in clusters like neighborhoods holding their breath. The hospital, back where we'd come, burned a steadier hole in the dark. The bridges were watching. I kept us lower than dignity, but higher than desperation, and threaded their ribs again, this time with wipers making a rhythm I could dance a landing to. The radio coughed the puppet voice once, petulant, then someone, maybe Salem, maybe a human in a room with a switch and a conscience, stepped on it hard enough that it only sounded like a shoe on a bug. "Rourke," I said, "tell me a thing I can put in my pocket when this is over." "Tommy Dorsey's trombone weighed 7 pounds, he said. "Why do you know that?" "I don't," he admitted. "I made it up. It feels true. Does that help?" "More than you think," I said. "Truth that feels true gets you across rivers." Northgate were its shoulders hunched low buildings, black water open on one side, hill on the other. The service road lay like a dare, wider than a farm lane, narrower than anything the Casa had any business calling a runway. The old Westfield Strip 2 miles inland glowed dim. Somebody had dragged battery lanterns to the edges like they'd stolen them from a camping store and promised to put them back. The wind on the river was squirrely, curling as if it had learned the city's habits. Two choices, I said. A strip that won't hate us, but makes us drive 2 miles with a box into a city that's forgetting its manners. Or a lane that will love us if we're perfect and kill us if we are an inch lazy. I vote for the lane, Rourke said softly. I saw your hands a minute ago. They didn't forget. Okay, I said to the part of me that demanded a jury. Okay, the approach was a low, slow, long apology to physics. I lined the mule up with the service lane by lining her up with nothing else black trees. A fence that ran like a line someone had drawn with their non-dominant hand. A guard shack that tilted like a hat that knew better days. I dumped flaps. Until the plane looked like a bird that had decided to be a tractor. I heard the props bite air they didn't like. I felt my wrists soften into the part of the touch that says yes now, but not too hard. We kissed the service lane in the only way to kiss something you shouldn't be kissing at all, with absolute faith and a tiny flinch. The mains took the weight. The nose wheel did what it was told. The brakes protested like a baptized sinner. We rolled to a stop 20 yards shy of a chain-link gate that had a city seal rusting on a sign that said, "Closed for maintenance," which is how cities keep secrets without lying. A man in a denim jacket jogged toward us with bolt cutters over one shoulder like a cartoon about to learn a lesson. He was lean, 50, good boots, eyes red at the edges but steady. He lifted a hand to the cockpit, and then, because he was a gentleman and understood airplanes and pilots, he waited for me to shut down before he tried to make me talk. "Valdez," he said when the props ticked themselves to heat death silence. "Water. I used to be water when this town was a teenager that believed in its teeth. Now I am water because nobody else will sleep on the floor when it smells wrong." He looked past me into the cargo and saw the second white box like a pastor seeing an old friend. "That for me? It's for us," I said. "But you can hold it first." We pushed the box on its hand truck down the ramp and across tarmac that turned to gravel, that turned to concrete stained with 100 cloudy days. Valdez cut the chain like he had been waiting for permission for a year. The gate groaned and swung wide. Inside, the plant felt like a ship without a captain, quiet in the wrong places, noisy where you wanted quiet. The control building's door required a key no one had handy and a shoulder everyone did. The lobby smelled like coffee. That had been poured and then put back in the pot because someone didn't have time to decide. The control room beyond was a glass aquarium full of sleeping screens and a rack that hummed because power loves itself when it has it. "Here," Valdez said, and led us to a cabinet that were locks like jewelry. He set a hand on the door. "This is the part of the town nobody knows about. When it forgets who it is, that line out there," he jerked his chin at the river, "becomes a mouth." "I brought a story the box will believe," I said, holding up the mylar. "You have to tell it. I'm just the librarian who carries the book." We did the dance again. My finger, his code, 2 keys in sympathy, tamper tape that gave up with a sigh. Inside the cabinet, the slot waited, the kind of slot that had been designed by a committee and then perfected by a machinist who loved one perfect circle at a time. Valdez took the white box's tethered metal spine and fed it into the Kia. Waiting mouth like communion. On the console, lights that had been sulking decided to become themselves. The screens woke, startled, then curious. A login prompt that had been haughtily refusing to speak cleared its throat and said, "Hello, water." Valdez looked at me like he wanted to kiss a machine and then shook himself, and did 3 more things with the fast fingers of a man who had seen both his children born and a pipe burst at 3 a.m. and knew which one could be yelled at. I stayed to one side and watched the flow numbers begin to gossip about themselves like old ladies on a porch. Rourke stood at the glass and watched the dark reservoirs outside settle from black mirrors into black bowls that knew their own edges again. The first alarm came from the far end of the room, high, insistent, cruelly cheerful. Not a system alarm. A door chime. The exterior access on the west side, the one next to the chlorine room. Valdez's head snapped toward it as if yanked by a short rope. "We locked that," he said. "Tonight locks tell stories," I said. "Somebody else can read." A second later, the control room phone rang, not the landline. A battered cell on the desk that had a sticker of a trout on it. Valdez stared at it like it had offered him a cigarette. "Only 3 people have this number," he said. "Me, my ex, and a parts guy who refuses to email," he answered. "Valdez." A voice I didn't know spoke loud enough that we didn't have to pretend not to listen. "Hello, Mr. Water. Love that you're trying to bring the lights on. Tell you what, we'd like you to step away from the cabinet, put the pretty key back in the pretty box, and roll it out onto the driveway. Then you can take your friend with the airplane and go home." The accent was lazy American with a layer of something practiced. The tone was that of a man selling knives at a fair. "Who is this?" Valdez said, which was a formality, and the knife seller laughed like a drunk who had found a way to stand up without the chair's permission. "Let's talk about chlorine," the voice said. "Let's talk about how your safety interlocks are currently thinking about how much they believe their sensors. Let's talk about how far a small overfeed can go in a city where everyone's boiling water because someone nice on the radio told them to." Valdez went white around the mouth. He looked at me. I shook my head once. Not to say, "Don't feel this," but to say, "Feel it and keep your hands moving." He did. He turned back to the console and typed something with extra care. "Who are you?" I asked, taking the phone from Valdez like I was reaching into a river for a ring I had dropped and couldn't afford to lose. "What do you want besides attention?" "I want you to prove the thing you always tell yourselves about yourselves," the voice said. "That you can be fragile and brave and fix things faster than we can break them. One want to see how many of you there are. I want to see what you do when we tilt the table." "Bored people are dangerous," I said. "Get a hobby that doesn't kill children." He laughed again. "I have one," he said. "It's you." The line clicked off. Outside. Something banged metal on metal, then a scream from a sensor that wasn't a sensor at all but a little machine under a lid that just wanted to live its life and measure a flow and was tired of liars. The West. Door alarm switched to steady tone. On the overview map of the plant, a camera view popped open of its own accord, then 3 more. Grainy black and white squares showed nothing, and then a figure in a hoodie and mask moving along the catwalk above the chlorine tanks, like a child trying on getting away with something. "Rourke," I said. "Present," he said, "already. Moving. Call Greer. Call whoever in that chain gets cops and trucks with brains. Tell them the plant is being had and we are very charming but not bulletproof." "On it," he said. Headset on again, voice turning into the tool it had been all night. "Salem Interim, Mule 6 at Northgate Security Incident. Responders. Requested now. Valdez opened a drawer and took out a wrench that would have made a medieval knight jealous. He handed it to me. "Just in case you need to introduce yourself," he said, and then reached for a manual valve lever on the panel and hauled it like a man pulling a friend out of a hole. "I can keep the chlorine from getting ideas for 5 minutes if your friend keeps making phone calls. I can keep a lot of things busy for 5 minutes," I said, and gave the wrench a little practice lift. The metal remembered hands. Footsteps sounded in the hall. Not running, strolling, the kind of footfalls men make when they have fed themselves a certain story about who they are. The door to the control room stayed shut because I had shoved the security bar down with a hip when we'd entered out of habit that now felt like a blessing. A shape appeared in the little wire-reinforced window, then a hand cupped eyes, then a mouth smiled under a mask in a way you can see even when you can't see a mouth. A knock, polite. 2, then 3, then one like a knock-knock joke that forgot. It's punchline. Valdez, open up. A man's voice called through the door in the exaggerated friendly tone con men use when they tell you they are not con men. We just want the box. You can have it, Valdez said, loud enough to carry. If you can pronounce hypochlorite without reading. Hypo-CHLOR-E-T, the man replied cheerfully. Close enough to kill your neighbor's friend. He tried the handle and found it a liar. His knuckles rapped the glass. This isn't my first water party. We have a lollipop for the gate, too. You have, let's call it, 3 minutes. Rourke met my eyes and made a tiny circle over his heart with his forefinger. Stay calm. Keep breathing. I nodded once, grateful to be told a thing I should have known. The room felt like an engine that had been idling and was now being asked to work. Abuse into art. Valdez's hands moved on the panel with the kind of delicacy you don't associate with men with bolt cutters. He didn't hurry. He made choices one at a time. I liked him immediately for that, and for the tiny prayer I saw his lips form in Spanish. The kind that was not performative, the kind that took God by the elbow and said, "Please, old friend, if you have a second." Through the side glass I saw a second masked figure cut the chain on the exterior valve yard, then another move with purpose toward the chlorine side. The cameras jittered as if someone else was fighting for control of what we could see. On the console, a prompt bloomed. Remote override requested. Accept, deny. The checkbox was ticked for deny, but the box kept popping like a child insisting now. Do we have physical interlocks? I asked Valdez. He nodded, jaw tight. Yes, he said. But these kids, if I were a kid with a screwdriver in a dream, he didn't finish. He threw a switch that made a light elsewhere in the plant snap from green to amber like a change of weather. That locks the feed cabinet. If they want to play, they need 4 more minutes than they have. Ask me about 4 minutes when we've got cops. Salem is sending, Rourke said into air that needed news. City units en route. Response is spaghetti, but it is moving. They said keep the monkeys off the valves. I'd rather meet the monkeys, I said. I don't like disembodied cowards. I took my wrench and walked to the door, and because I am not a fool, I didn't stand right in front of the glass. Gentlemen, I said through the window, we are having a night. Go home. Drink water, the clean kind, live to be less boring. The man nearest the door tilted his head like a curious dog. Lady, you have no idea what kind of party you walked into, he said. And then he raised a small device toward the window, a square, nothing instrument-looking about it, nothing on the front but a lens. We brought fireworks, I didn't think. Sometimes your body remembers a class you took once in a room smelling like coffee and other people who had decided to tell the truth for a living. I spun away from the window, pulled Valdez with me by the back of his jacket, and shouted, "Down!" The little square popped no flame, just a bright white scream, and the wire window in the door shattered into safe, little glass confetti that pattered across the floor like a child's laugh. In a bad dream. The concussion wasn't much, but it was enough to make my balance reconsider and to send the door bar quivering in its housing. Camera flashbang. Valdez said, teeth clenched, "Great, they shop online." I lunged back to the door before the men outside could recover from their own toy and kicked the bar hard into its slot. From the other side came the cheerful voice again, now painted a little with irritation. "Let's move this along then." Rourke's radio whispered, 2 minutes, and I wanted to bite the number into my arm so I wouldn't drop it. On the console, the prompt that had been popping politely turned red and grew teeth. Remote override escalated. The checkbox was GRAYED. Valdez swore with texture. "They've got a box somewhere in the loop pretending it's us," he said. "They can't open the chlorine cabinet from here, but they can push plant to an error state, and then when folks panic, they open the wrong door to quiet the beeping. Classic. I need 30 seconds, then a minute. Then we're through." His hands did violence to the most careful part of the interface, and the interface begged his forgiveness by doing exactly what he demanded. Something thunked against the exterior door. A crowbar, then a second thunk like a friend joining in. The top hinge groaned. The bolt pins wept dust. I measured the distance from the door to the console to the emergency, shut down in the time in my bones, and came up with a number that was a dare. "Rourke," I said, "if they come through before Valdez says go, you crouch behind that rack and you don't be noble. You hear me?" "I have never been accused of nobility," he said, which made me like him more than I already did. "I can make myself a very small tree," the door shrieked. A top corner peeled. A hand reached around and groped for the bar like a lover. Sneaking into a window, I introduced my wrench to the hand. It withdrew with a sound I have heard men make when they realize their story about themselves left out pain. 30. Valdez said, strangled, and something on the screen turned green. And stayed green with the obstinacy of a mule. Now we wait a minute for the handshake to cascade. If we pull early, we lose it. If we pull late, the crowbar came again and the bottom hinge gave way. The door leaned like a drunk at a wedding. Hands followed. The man with the mask spoke to me through the window he had made, and his voice was the voice of a man who had decided he could not be embarrassed. "You're very good," he said. "I don't want to shoot you. I never want to shoot anyone. But I am bored of waiting. Your minute is too long. Everything good is longer than you think it will be." I said, "Stand down. You came here for a story. I brought you one. It's about how water keeps being holy even when men are stupid." He laughed like he didn't understand his own laughter. Then he shoved and the door did a slow, tragic compromise. The gap was the width of a man. His shoulder appeared, then his head, then his chest, gun at his hip, eyes laser bright, even through the rubber. He stepped in with the little hop men make over thresholds when they think they have become the main character. Two more shoulders crowded behind. "Valdez," I said without turning my head. "How long?" "1 Mississippi," he said. 2 Mississippi, 3-4. The man lifted the gun from his hip in a bored, casual way and pointed it at the panel I loved. He smiled at me over the sights with a child's mischief and a teenager's cruelty. "Let's see what the box does when it can't be a box," he said. I stepped into him. Not forward sideways, because men who practice shooting practice for people who come straight on. I put the wrench into his wrist and then into his ear. Because we were out of philosophy. The gun went somewhere that would be a problem later. He made a noise like a question. Behind him, a second man lunged over his shoulder and caught a piece of my arm in the world, narrowed to his breath and my breath, and the number Valdez was counting like a nursery rhyme that had fallen down a flight of stairs. 52, Valdez said, a threat of triumph in it now. 53. "Rourke," I said, and didn't know what I was asking except everything. He moved, not noble, but necessary, and his pencil went through an eye of the second man like he'd been carrying a weapon all night without knowing. The second man screamed and forgot his plan in favor of finding his face again. The first man swung and caught my shoulder with something that would be a bruise in the shape of a county tomorrow. I reduced his plan to 0 with the wrench. He went down like dignity without a witness. 60, Valdez said, and hit a key and turned one last physical lock like someone signing a promise with blood. The screen flashed once, then twice. Then the plant overview shifted from hungry algorithm wanting attention to system that knows its name. The prompt went away. In its place a line of text appeared that made me laugh like a person who has been dunked in cold water and accepts that they did, in fact, want to swim. Authentication. Accepted. The door banged again, but it didn't matter yet. What mattered was that the West Bank water remembered how to be itself without being told by a liar. Valdez sagged and then stood up taller than he had a right to. He put both hands on the console and whispered, Hija de la chingada we did. It, which is not something you say in church but is the kind of liturgy the world sometimes needs. Sirens in the distance. A pair, then three, then more, getting closer, breaking into the plant's quiet like honest men being paid to be loud. Red and blue through the glass. Headlights fanged the chain link. Valdez reached for the door bar to lift it, and I grabbed his wrist. Not yet, I said. They wear uniforms, so do the men who came to play. You wait until you see a badge you know the name of. The man on the floor groaned. Rourke slid the gun he'd kicked away farther away with the side of his shoe, as if unwilling to touch. It's Story. The second man, cradling his eye, decided to be brave again, and then decided not to be. He bolted through the torn door like a rabbit that had memorized the path home. Outside, a shout. Footsteps. Someone yelled police. Like a word they were allowed to use. I lifted the bar and heard the satisfying ratchet of a gate further down finally being asked to do its job with a key instead of a lie. 2 officers, whose faces looked like sleep, had been a rumor entered with guns low but ready. They wore the kind of body armor that says, "We believe the funding fairy," and the kind of eyes that say, "We have not let this town kill its kindness yet." They took in the man on the floor, Valdez at the panel, me with a wrench, Rourke with an empty set of hands, and made 1,000 decisions I was glad not to be responsible for. Hands. One said gently because he saw the way mine shook when I wasn't making them move. We showed him we had them. Which way did he run? The other asked, and Rourke pointed with economy. Officers peeled off, more boots. A smell like pepper and someone else's adrenaline. The plant breathed. The alarms that had wanted attention settled into the steady sort that means the world is still awake and would like you to know it. Greer's voice came into my ear, from a small speaker clipped to my pocket. I didn't remember clipping there. Ione, you in one piece? I am several pieces, but they're friendly, I said. Northgate? Authenticated. Alive. Police on scene. 1 bored man on our floor. 1 bored man in the night. Chlorine is a story we're writing. Greer. Exhaled a thing she'd been saving. Copy. City 2 plant reports their rapper signed from St. Bridget. They're standing on their throats the same way Valdez is. If the river doesn't come into your control room with opinions, we'll have water we can trust in the morning. Not a bad night's work for a gardener. Her voice shifted. The professional armor thinned. Come home alive, Hallie. I looked at the wrench in my hand and the line of red on my forearm where the flashbang glass had drawn a new map. At Rourke's pencil lying like an honest little sword on the floor. At Valdez stroking the panel with the tenderness of a man who had seen a child breathe again. I felt the ache in my shoulder begin to present its bill. We'll taxi off the service lane and be out of your hair in 10, I said. Mule 6 is going to need a bath. Baths for everyone, Greer sighed. And passports for the bored gentlemen if they think they can run. The net is waking up, and it is hungry for appetites like theirs. The officers took my name and Rourke's and Valdez's and the part of the story we had time to tell, and then made me drink a paper cup of water that tasted like a sacrament. I didn't tell them it tasted like victory. It tasted like water, which is what victory should taste like when you've done the work. We walked the white box's tether back into its spine, sealed the cabinet with new tape and my initials, and Valdez's like 2 kids making a clubhouse reel. Outside, the air smelled like someone somewhere had started to believe again. A neighbor's porch light blinked to life. Up on the hill, a dog barked at nothing because nothing was finally something it could find. Back at the service lane, the service lane. Mule waited with the patience of a thing that had learned its job in another war. The foam streaks on the glass had dried to a film that looked almost pretty in the moonlight. I put my hand on her flank and she felt warm and large and good. Back to Trout, Rourke said, more question than order. Back to Trout, I said. Then I'm going to sit on the floor next to my bed and look at my hands until I remember they're mine. Valdez walked with us to the gate. I don't know what they think they're doing, he said, voice still steady but softer. Breaking. The things that make the quiet. Maybe they never had a quiet. We brought them one, I said, for tonight. He nodded. If you come through here again, I'll leave you a thermos, he said. Coffee, good, not the lobby kind. Do that and I'll land on your lawn, I said. And he laughed like a man who had just decided laughter wasn't a luxury. We turned the mule on and left carefully by the way we'd come. The tires complaining. About pretenses again, the wind shrugging when the night took us back. We made for Trout, the river pages flipping under us, the bridges just watching now instead of hissing. Trout's voice in our ears sounded like a man pulling a blanket up to his chin. You again, he said. I was going to make coffee. Then I remembered I don't have a pot. You can have my last donut if you promise to stop making my paperwork interesting. We'll do our worst, I said, and brought the mule down onto the runway like a pen stroke you don't have to. Erase. We rolled to our spot. Someone found us chocks. Someone else found a rag and wiped a little blood off my arm with a tenderness that made my throat hurt. The field looked like a camp the morning after a storm tie-downs that had survived one. Bent sign. People walking like they had learned something about their ankles. Greer was waiting by the fence with her hands in her pockets and her face like a woman who had been sitting on a porch not asleep and not awake watching for a car on a road. When she saw the mule, she didn't smile. She let something else move. In her body a release that wasn't theatrical. She opened the gate herself because sometimes leaders don't need other people's hands. You did it, she said, and then, because she is who she is, we did it. Because a lot of hands touched the right things in the right order. You flew a plane through a river's throat. Ajay made a dead network remember its name. Valdez told water a story it liked better than the lie. Trout kept lights on with spit. And faith, Rourke remembered how to be a tree. She looked at me, and you came when called. I came when called, I repeated, tasting the words carefully, like a new food that might become what I feed myself. We debriefed in a hangar that had a coffee smell that had been promised and delivered. Devon was asleep on a coil of hose like a cat. Ajay arrived with a sweater on inside out and a grin that was too tired to be pretty, and thus was. She set a hand on my shoulder, and I almost flinched because bruises were writing a new chapter. There, but the hand was gentle and the flinch became a yes. The ICU monitors took a breath and then stood up, she said. I watched a ventilator find its manners. I watched a nurse stop counting silently to keep from crying. The water plant chorus says the same song in a different key. If the saboteur had been 5 minutes smarter, she didn't finish. She didn't have to. Thank you. I nodded and stared at the floor and then at my hands. They were still moving slightly, a tremor that had nothing to do with fear now and everything to do with momentum. Rourke pressed a cup of coffee into one of them. I was about to tell him I didn't drink coffee after midnight because my heart would write a memoir about it, and then I took the cup and drank because it tasted like a friend. Greer leaned against a workbench and looked at me with a question that had nothing to do with airplanes. Cascade 1, she said softly, not a question. An invitation. I set the cup down. We took a bird full of people into a meadow where the air rolled like a dog, I said. We shouldn't have been there. We were because the book said, if the alternates are full, you make a new page. I put her down. She didn't break. A man in the back died anyway because his heart had been waiting all day to decide what kind of day it wanted. I got out with my vow written on my bones. No more being the pointy end of other people's emergencies. Tonight I was the pointy end again. It didn't feel like a betrayal. It felt like, not penance, not revenge on the sky. Like noticing the door was open and the house was on fire and I was the one standing closest to the bucket. Greer nodded in the deliberate way of someone who also carries water and fires and doors. I won't call you again unless I can't. Stand who I am if I don't, she said. That's the promise I can make. Fair, I said. Rourke's radio ticked with new life but not panic aftershocks of the town deciding to be morning again. A man somewhere reported that the freeway lights had woken up in a line like soldiers. A woman reported that the downtown Cleverboxes had finally accepted their nap and would like to apologize to the airplanes. Someone else said a rescue boat had pulled a child off a snag near mile 12 and the mother had collapsed on the gravel and screamed in a way that emptied the corners of men's eyes. I felt the night tilt. Not towards sleep. Towards something that comes when the work that was assigned to you is done and the work you give yourself begins. I thought of my cabin, my bees, the beach in her barn, the radar station bones, the creek talking to rocks like an old couple on a porch. I thought of how I would stand in my yard tomorrow and the sky would be a different sky because I had elbowed it and it had elbowed me back. Greer's phone vibrated. She glanced, frowned slightly, and then handed it to me without comment. On the screen was a still frame from a grainy camera I recognized from the plant, a shot of the gate at the far north fence line, a blur of a runner, a truck shaped like a child's drawing, a license plate caught in a sliver of headlight like a face in a mirror, 7UL936, your bored friend, she said. My bored friend now will make him less bored. I handed the phone back. He brought a toy he thought would work on a door, I said. He forgot to bring a story for when it didn't. Ajayi's pager, an actual pager, because sometimes old things are the ones that stand up when the lights go out, chirped. She glanced, grinned. St. Bridget's dialysis suite just high-fived me with beeps, she said. God, I'm going to sleep for an hour and then wake up and cry. She looked at me. You good? I'm a person, I said. It's a start. We were beginning to exhale when Salem Interim's voice threaded into the hangar like a snake and a blessing. Mule 6, he said, polite even now. If you're still on field, be advised we've got a loitering hello with no squawk, dancing big lazy circles north of St. Bridget at 1500 AGL. No lights, radar paint. Says civilian profile, but the paint is drunk. We've asked them for a song. They're humming. Might be nothing. Might be your bored boys calling a friend. Might be someone with a camera. If it's one of ours, it's the quietest one we've ever had. Just keep your head up if you go out again. I wasn't going out again, I said, because even heroines lie to themselves when it's late. Then I looked at Greer and Ajayi and Rourke and the mule, and the white streaks on the windshield, and the coffee in my hand, and the bruise writing its love letter on my shoulder. And the part of me that knows where I keep my vows and my tools swung its feet off the bed. Describe the hello. I said. High skids, Salem said. Fat belly. Looks like a newsbird or a contract utility that got bored. But she's keeping a line on the hospital like she's thinking too hard. Thinking isn't a crime, Greer said. But thinking where people are dying is a choice. Rourke was already rolling the mule's ladder back to the door. We're not going to chase a helicopter, he said lightly in the tone he used to say things just before we did them. No, I said. We're going to take off and pretend not to. And if we happen to see something, we happen to tell a man with a radio. And if that man happens to have friends who fly things that go faster and higher and hold grudges, then maybe the bored bird learns a lesson about where it is polite to be curious. Greer's mouth twitched at the corner. I won't tell you to go, she said. I will tell you that if you do, there are people in that hospital who would like to not have to be interesting to anyone who finds grief entertaining. Ajayi looked at me, and in her eyes was the entire night, and the ones before it, and the ones after. Do not be a hero, she said. Be a pilot. Same thing tonight, I said, and climbed the ladder. My hands had stopped shaking, not because they were brave, because they had decided the argument was over, and the doing was the only part left, we lit the mule again. She responded like a dog who had been sleeping but hadn't really been sleeping. We rolled into dark that had learned our names and learned not to use them wrong. We lifted with all the care of a tired person picking up a sleeping child. North of St. Bridget the sky was black and green-veined and new. We slid into it like thieves of bad luck. The city lay under us like a patient still under anesthesia, but beginning to swallow on her own. The hospital's roof blinked once in the pattern of a language that meant, "We're here, we're here. Salem, Mule 6. We'll do a lazy racetrack north of the river for 10 minutes, Rourke said to the man who had been our lantern all night. If your loiterer has a hobby, maybe he'd like to explain it. We found him on the third turn, a little bubble on a spindle, skids like a grasshopper, circling slow like a man in a grocery store pretending he hasn't decided whether to steal the grapes. No beacon, no strobe. The cockpit glow was wrong too. Dim, too careful. He was higher than us and sloppy, not drunk. Just under the illusion that darkness gives privacy. "What do you want?" I asked the black dome of the sky. It didn't answer. The hello did a little correction that wasn't wind and dropped 10 feet in a way that said his left hand was telling a different story than his right. A spotlight flicked once, off, like a blink, then on again, low power. Swept the hospital facade, lingered on the ambulance bay's door as if trying to read the hinge. "Rourke," I said, "ask Salem if anyone on the roof would like to point something that makes a bigger noise than we do at him." Salem said, "Copy," and under his next breath I thought I heard him say, "I love this job tonight." In the corner of my eye a blip moved that could have been a bigger bird waking up. The hello spotlight snapped to full for a second and pinned a window where a nurse was adjusting a drip. The nurse looked up, hand-shading eyes confused. I felt something in my chest do a thing I don't permit it to do when I'm in an airplane. "We're done," I said to a person I hadn't met. I eased the mule into a line that would put us slightly above and ahead of the hello, not where men expect criticism. I kept our profile lower than the sum of our parts and made our turn a question. The hello answered with a wobble of annoyance. "Unidentified." "Helicopter, this is a very tired city," Rourke said on guard, voice easy as whiskey. "Turn on your lights, squawk, make a radio call, explain yourself, or go somewhere else. Pick any two." Silence, then a voice that wanted to be bland and had never been invited to bland training. "Guards for emergencies," it said. "Is one," Rourke replied sweetly. "We are out of patience and you are out of darkness." The hello's lights snapped off again. It drifted north 10 yards like a man whistling. I put the mule where a mistake would be rude, the hello pilot noticed. He clicked his landing light twice at me like a wink. Then, in a choice that told me more about him than I needed, he began to ease toward the hospital again, light off, like a cat who had met a broom and decided the broom was not God. "Salem," I said. "Now." A shape slid under us, fat and fast and mean, not ours, no markings I could see, just intent. It came from the west like a decision and climbed straight to the hello's left shoulder and lit its own little light that said, in a dialect, "Even stupid men can read. I have a badge you can't see." The hello froze. Then the air made room for voices on frequencies we don't get to listen to. And the hello did something that would have been graceful if it hadn't been so abrupt. It left. East, then north, then up into the part of the sky where the storm was still combing hair. "Thank you," I said to all the men and women and machines that had conspired to make that happen. And because I had used up all my words, added, "Please don't come back." The hospital's roof blinked again in threes. The city sighed. The river went on being old. I turned the mule toward Troutdale one last time, and as we lined up for home, a line of text crawled across my brain that I didn't put there and didn't ask for and didn't reject. "You can go back to your garden when the sun comes up. But the phone knows where you live." We landed. We taxied, we parked. The hangar swallowed us like a story closing a book. Greer met me at the bottom of the ladder and said nothing. Just put a hand on my forearm where the glass had written its love letter and squeezed once. I'm going home, I said, and my voice broke because I believed myself and I didn't. Good, she said. Go, before I ask you to do anything else. The filter will cool. The nets will warm. The bored men will get bored of their boredom for a minute. Rourke packed his pencil into a pocket like a little ceremony. Tree returning to forest, he said. You'll call if you need my shade. I'll plant you, I said, and he smiled a real smile, not a radio one. I walked to my truck as the horizon thought about light. The east was not pink yet, but it had decided to consider pink. My hands had done their work, and now they dangled like hands. The mule ticked as she cooled, like a house talking to itself after guests leave. I put my hand on her one last time. And she was warm and alive and far too brave for a thing made of parts. The road up mountain was empty, and then it wasn't because nothing is, not really. A pair of headlights slid behind me at the highway's last on-ramp, and then stayed there, patient as a cat. I told myself a story about coincidence and unmarked sedans and men who drove because they had places to go. I told myself another about bored boys who liked to see where heroines slept. I kept telling myself the first one until I took the turn at mile marker 22, and the headlights took it too. The logging road is not a polite place for a tale. It gives itself away to anyone who doesn't know its ruts. The car behind me did not bump where it should have and did not slow where it must, which told me the driver knew the road, which told me the driver had gone to effort, which told me I was not the only person who knew my habits. My cabin crest came, and I killed my lights and slid into the trees like I'd never left them. The other car rolled past my spur, and then stopped, and then reversed like a man thinking out loud. It idled at the mouth of my lane, lights off. The dark swallowed its shape, left a suggestion like a wolf low to the ground. I sat in my truck with the key halfway out and my hand on it, and listened to the creek and my own ribs and the ravens who had decided to attend a dawn they hadn't been invited to. The car down the road stayed a car. No door opened. No one called my name. The forest kept its commentary. I waited until waiting became an action and not a refusal. My sat phone chimed in the jacket pocket I had hung on the back of the passenger seat, like a friend thinking it was being helpful. I stared at the pocket. The chime came again. I took the phone out and looked at the screen, and there was no number, just a message with no sender, like a thought you couldn't tell if you'd had or not. Hello. Kestrel. Nice cabin. I didn't type. I didn't breathe. A second message. We should talk about your bees. I looked down the lane where the car waited, and where the trees were thick, and where the creek ran thin, and where the ravens had opinions, and I thought about my vow and my garden, and my hands and the white box and the hospital and the plant, and the bored men and the phone and the filter, and the line between quiet and a door someone keeps knocking on. And then the third message arrived. Open the gate. We're friends. I put my hand on the door handle and listened hard to the part of me that had carried a wrench into a room full of men who had confused boredom with a plan. That part of me said, very clearly, as if it were pointing to a map I had drawn years ago, do not. Down the road the car's engine changed pitch. The ravens rose. The creek, which had never cared about any of us, said what creeks always say. We go on. I opened my mouth to answer the phone with all the words I had left, and then the night, which had been so generous with letting me choose, chose for me. The beam of a flashlight cut across the trees, steady as a promise, heading straight for my gate. Gate. The beam knifed through the trees and found my fence post like it had been born, knowing the shape of cedar. I slid down in the driver's seat until my ribs met the steering wheel and turned the key without starting habit from nights when sound was a choice you could not take back. The creek kept talking beside me as if none of us mattered. The sat phone in my hand blinked again. Hello. Kestrel and I did the oldest, truest thing a pilot learns on bad instruments. I went to partial. Panel. I shut it off. I wanted only what I could trust. Another light joined the first, lower, more nervous, sweeping the ditch like it was hunting for the right story to tell itself. Men's voices carried thin and wrong through the trees. The same bright, pleasant tone I had met at the plant last hour, a performance voice, bounced down my spur like a radio ad. "We bring coffee," it called, "and a conversation." I reached behind the passenger seat and pulled the old metal bee smoker into my lap. The smoker is not a weapon. It is a ritual. Bees think in scents, the way pilots think in numbers. Give them a story of smoke and their bodies choose calm over war. My hands went to work with the muscle memory of 1,000 inspections. A twist of dry grass, a curl of birch bark, a pinch of punky wood. The Zippo clicked. The little chamber breathed. A thin snake of sweet smoke unwound into the truck's cold. My heart slowed by 2 beats I could measure. Left the truck and moved the way the ravens had taught me, quick when it counted, still when it mattered. In the trees the world narrowed to needles, sap, and the particular crunch of duff under boots that don't belong. The new flashlight stopped at my gate. A man's silhouette leaned in, one hand high on the latch like he was telling a secret to. My lock, the other man swept his light up and down the line. 121. Bored, like he was checking his watch. "Gates closed for a reason," I said from the dark, 10 yards to their right. I kept my voice the flat cockpit voice, the one that tells frightened passengers what they need to hear, and nothing else. My smoke drifted in a soft blue ribbon across the beam's slab. My bees would carry this in and tell their sisters a story about fog. The voice turned toward where it thought I was. The beam jumped and found bark. "Ms. Halley, Kestrel." Good morning and congratulations, that was some flying. If a smile could have teeth, his had them. He couldn't see me. "Good. Step back from my gate," I said. "Both of you. Hands where I can tell you have them." They did not. The pleasant one held his out at shoulder height, empty, palms forward, the theater of assurance. The other swung. His light through the trees again like a fisherman dragging a lure. "We just want to talk," the pleasant one said. "You've had a long night. We're friends." And his light fell over a white bandage crooked at his wrist. "Friends don't test chlorine alarms," I said. "Friends don't walk into control rooms wearing other people's names." "Oh, we had to see who'd show up," he said pleasantly. "We were not disappointed. You're better than our guys said." "Your guys?" he chuckled. "Everybody has guys." The beam flicked to the creek, drifted back to the latch. "We don't have to be on different teams, Kestrel. We admire people who can move the chess pieces. And we pay very well for pilots who can navigate when satellites forget their own names." My stomach made the small, slow turn it only does when a bank gets shallow enough to be interesting. "I'm not in the chess business. You are tonight." His voice lost the cheer, gained a small respect. "The storm was a gift to men like me. It turns out it might be a gift to you too. Think bigger than Portland IQ screens. Think bigger than fish water. Think about how fragile a world is that goes blind when the sun coughs. Think about how valuable the hands are that can stitch anything back together then. Yours, so." He tapped my latch, polite as prayer. "Let's talk about how we use them." I listened to the creek count to 5. "Leave my gate," I said. "Or I use them to write your license plate on a piece of paper the sheriff will enjoy. You think we're here without the sheriff knowing where we are?" He laughed again, and it was ugly now. "We aren't thugs, Kestrel. We're a service. People higher than you and I bless our invoices. The sheriff waves at us when we pass each other on the highway." He let that hang and then conversational. "We saw your barn on the satellite when the clouds broke. Old beach, pretty. Would be a shame if that wood went up. Dry summer this year." Something behind my sternum turned to gravel and settled. I let my mouth find a small smile it didn't feel. You hurt my plane or my bees, and you will spend the rest of your very clever life drinking water that tastes like the inside of a battery, I said very gently. Step back. Last time I asked. Or what? It wasn't the pleasant one this time. The second man, lower voice, a grunt in it. You'll call your librarian? The one who likes to give orders on phones? He wanted me to say Greer's name. He wanted me to prove what I knew. He wanted me to give him a clean wire to follow into a room I had barely agreed to re-enter. I breathed until my ribs stopped trying to do other people's thinking. Last time, I repeated. Pleasant whistled. 3 notes, jaunty, like a tune for children at recess. Then in a tone like, okay, new game, your choice. Something metallic snapped, the gate chain sang. The latch dipped and popped. The line of the fence shivered in the flashlight. He'd brought bolt cutters, the creek talked. The ravens. Took a step down the branch. So did I. I put the smoker on the ground in front of me like a small altar and reached for the switch I had installed 2 summers ago after a cougar discovered the arithmetic of my chickens. The switch tied a deep cycle battery to 2 ancient floodlights bolted under the eaves of the barn. Both aimed low, one at the gate, one at the lane. I had not tested them in a while. I thumbed the switch and my hill sprang day. Light hammered the men. They reeled, hands up, both faces pale discs. For the first time I saw them the way they were instead of the way they wanted to be. Older than their swagger, tired around the edges, matchy soft-shell jackets, clean boots that had met gravel but not yards. Pleasant he had a sharp nose, a thin mouth squinted across his hands and found me crouched in the trees. There she is, he murmured. Look at that. Look at this, I said, and keyed the handheld on my hip, not the sat phone, not anything clever. The little Yasu ham I used for weather nets and fire gossip. The old analog repeater up the ridge I'd mapped by listening the first summer. Mount Wilson, this is B-Lady, I said calmly, pitching my voice exactly the way the old men with call signs did. Got 2 unknowns cutting fence at my spur, mile 22, logging road north. Bearing north-northwest. Copy, anyone? Static. Then, like an old truck catching after a cough, a voice I could feel the mustache on. B-Lady, Wilson. Copy you. You want the boys or just the horn? The horn, I said. And if a cruiser? Can't sleep, I won't cry. Copy, Wilson said, a smile in it. Wake the woods. 2 seconds later, the old volunteer station, half a mile as the crow flies through its voice across the ridge. The siren hadn't sung since the county's last real fire, but it woke hungry and loud. Coyotes yipped. The men at my gate flinched in perfect sympathy like they had been pushed. Floodlights sketched them clean for a camera I didn't have but wished. The siren wound higher, then held at a note that even the rocks remembered. Nice trick, Pleasant said over the animal noise. He was doing math now. I could see it enter his face like weather. But the folks who come when you call, how fast are they on your road? Fast enough, I said, and friends with the ravens. The second man decided he'd had enough. Of theater. He stepped into the gate's shadow and toward the chain where the flood's glare was weakest. Move the light, he barked. Pleasant shifted. The beam walked across the fence like a man stroking a dog. I gave ground into the trees, toward the barn, and let them believe I was retreating. I wasn't. I was putting myself where I could do the thing I had kept not doing for 3 years. The barn doors threw yellow bars onto the hardpack as I cracked them enough to slip in. The beach breathed her warm oil and dust into my face. I had slept in this barn during storms just to hear her shift the way sleeping horses do. My hand went to the master, then to the magnetos, then stopped. I wasn't going to fly her. I was going to speak with her voice. I reached to the little toggle marked landing. Light and the big silver nose light woke like a lighthouse. I swung the doors wider and the beam walked down the lane and hit the gate head on, layering a square of day over the flood's day, bright as interrogation. I stepped back out into the night with the smoker in one hand and something else in the other, an old bear banger, the kind I used for above tree-line evenings when elk got too interested in my apples. I chambered a cartridge one-handed like a trick I had never had occasion to perform. "Last ask," I said again. "Leave now." Pleasant's face changed. Not fear, displeasure. You could tell he didn't like people who didn't recite his lines. "Do you know what I want from you?" he asked conversationally. The siren doubled his words and shook the needles. "I want your hands. I want your head. I want your map. We can make you a saint for the next 20 years. You'll save lives. You'll pick who breathes." He took a half step like men do when they want you to see their good intentions. "And in the inches between those noble acts we will ask you to fly a box from a place to a place and not open it and not ask who. And in exchange you will have the resources to fix the parts of the world your little radio and your beehives can't touch." "I don't need you to make me a saint," I said. "And I have never needed anyone to make me a sinner. You brought your own." I lifted the banger and fired it straight up. The cartridge went 100 feet and broke with a sharp white crack that slapped the ridge like a hand. The ravens exploded from the alder. My bees sighed in their boxes at the edge of hearing, and the men's shoulders tightened even if their faces didn't change. "Enough," the second man snarled and lifted a hand. For the first time I saw a gun. Small, plastic. He was sloppy with it. His stance said the last time he'd fired, one was at a range with a paper silhouette that didn't run. The barrel wavered, then steadied toward the light my barn. "No," I said, and did the single most impolite thing a person can do in a negotiation. I stepped into the light where both of them could see my face. I wanted his eyes on me, not on my barn. "Shoot me," I said softly. "Because you can't shoot my plane and leave here alive." He blinked, the focus reset. The barrel twitched to my sternum. Pleasant reached over and pushed his wrist down, still polite. "Don't," he said. Not mercy, calculus. His beam moved slightly. For just a sliver his light swept through the trees behind me and struck glass my truck's windshield, and in that sliver he saw his own car reflected. The unmarked sedan idling down the lane with its plate bright as forgiveness. The plate number slid into the part of my brain that writes things in grease pencil on a glare shield and doesn't erase them when you land. I smiled and made sure he saw me do it. We stood in our freeze frame for 3 long heartbeats, the siren, the creek, the ravens, the ocean-deep silence between men deciding whether they want to be the kind of men they told their fathers they were. Then from down the hill the slow, delicious crunch of another set of tires began to climb the spur. Not fast, not stealthy. The speed of men who own the night because they've patrolled it since they were 19. A spotlight washed the lane. A bull bar glinted. Pleasant cursed it under his breath so slightly I had to read it in his mouth. He took 2 steps back and the beam dipped. "Another time, Kestrel," he said, the theater back, the bright teeth on the smile. "Your librarian is sloppy with her Rolodex. Tell her to buy a better lock." He tugged his partner's jacket. The second man snarled like a dog at a leash. They moved to their sedan. The sheriff's Tahoe rounded the bend like a friend with a big chest. 2 deputies inside. I lifted the banger above my head and waved it like a flare. The sedan tried to squeeze past the Tahoe where there was no room. The deputy put his vehicle exactly in the lane and dared physics to disagree. "Evening." The sheriff called through his open window, voice dry as a good biscuit. "Everything okay up here?" He had seen the plate. He had weighed it. He had decided not to see it until he had to. "I'm fine," I said. "Those gentlemen were lost." Pleasant leaned out of his window, wallet already open on a badge I didn't recognize because it wasn't from here. He held it so the sheriff could see it but not name it. "We'll be out of your hair," he said brightly. "Just helping a neighbor. Long night." The sheriff said, and in that one gentle syllable he fit. "I see you. I know what you are." I'm deciding how much trouble I want to have this morning. He glanced at me. I gave him the smallest nod I had. Well, he said at last, moving his vehicle a quarter-inch the way men do when they want you to think they have moved far more. If you're done helping, help down the hill. The old siren woke Mrs. Hoover's chickens, and she's going to make biscuits to punish us. Pleasant laughed. Nobody else did. The sedan threaded past with inches like coins. As they rolled, he looked at me across his shoulder and tipped an imaginary hat. Then they were gone down the lane, through the trees, into whatever map they thought they had of me. The sheriff cut his engine. He let the night breathe in the gap he made. "Be lady," he said gently. "We all should have stayed asleep." "You want the siren off?" "Please," I said, "and thank Wilson for me." "You tell him yourself tomorrow," the sheriff said. "He'll be spooning syrup and telling lies at the Grange by 8. He studied my face in the flood's hard light, and then looked past me at the barn's wide mouth and the old plain's golden nose. "If anything ever happens to that," he said simply, "this county will hang a man by his feelings." We stood together until the siren wound down from its high and the woods recovered their usual opinion of us. Then he tipped 2 fingers, turned his Tahoe, and went to negotiate with Mrs. Hoover's birds. He didn't ask my name. I didn't offer it. We don't do that in the hills. We offer stew and help with hay and take names only for baby goats and grave markers. When the night was empty again, except for the creek, I slid the gate's chain back through the posts and padlocked it with hands that finally shook. I breathed in the smoker's sweetness, went to the hives, and set the lids with a touch softer than any I had given anyone all night. Back in the barn, I climbed the beech's step and sat in the left seat in the dark, my forehead on the cool of the yoke, and felt my life take a shape that was not the one I had declared it would be 3 years ago. I did not sleep. Morning doesn't care if you've earned it. It comes. The sun lifted a shoulder over the ridgeline, and with it the phone I had shut off demanded to pretend it had only been napping. I turned it on. No number. One message: "We liked your lights." Another: "You'll say yes when you're tired." I typed: "I will never be as tired as your imagination." Then, "Lose this number." No reply. The day set its jaw on the ridge and the mess of the night began to go from soup to inventory bruises. Notes: the smell of diesel that somehow found its way into your sweater. I made coffee on the stove that has burned wood and coffee, both equally for as long as I have trusted heat. I sat on the stoop and drank it while the bees negotiated the morning. A raven landed on the fence post and examined me like I had made a poor decision, and it would be willing to help me correct it. My truck's tires still wore the lane's dust. My shoulders wore the plant man's hand and the wrench's argument. My mind wore a suit I had hung up after Cascade 1. It itched now, but it fit. Greer came up the spur, just shy of 9 in a state SUV. So filthy you could tell it had not been born thinking it would turn into this. She got out with the face of a person who had slept 80 minutes and used 50 of them to talk someone else off a bad choice. She didn't look at my gate until she had looked at my hands. Then she did. "I had company," I said. "I know," she said. "He called me from halfway down the mountain to say hello." She walked to the barn, put a hand on the beach the way people put a hand on a horse's shoulder, then came back and leaned on my stoop post like she'd been coming to my house all her life. "I am both sorry and not surprised. You were in a file long before you built this. We keep lists. They keep lists. Some of their lists start with ours." "Leak?" I asked. "Not one hole," she said. "A lot of pores. Think of a sponge pressed to a map. Think of an intern who wanted to impress a man with a grant to study how continuity works. Think of 3 small companies with large appetites that train red teams by making real people bleed. Think of a man who likes to stand by doors and pretend to be invited. Pick any 3 and you have our night." Her jaw worked once, twice, like a horse tasting a bit and deciding to accept it because the rider is kind. "I'm cleaning the sponge." But I can't ring the whole world. Your bored man told me you pay saints, I said. He thinks that is how to buy me. He doesn't know how saints are made, she said. You don't buy saints. You light a candle and hope they have time to pass by. She looked out at my hives, my creek, the old radar station bones above us with their black birds and green skin. Do you want me to move you? No, I said, out of my mouth before my brain got to sit down. I don't run from men who don't know the names of my trees. Then let's make it so they trip over every root getting to you, she said. Camera at the bend, deadfall on the spur. Wilson on speed dial, sheriff on bread and gravy, and this. She produced from her jacket pocket a key fob the size of a plum with a slider that covered her recessed button. If you press this twice, fast, a helicopter will disagree with someone within 12 minutes. If you press it 3 times, God will be irritated we beat him to the thunder. Only use it when you would rather apologize to me than have a conversation with men at your gate. Who pays for the rotor blades? I asked. People who have budgets labeled "we should have spent this last year," she said. Consider it an apology for the sponge. I turned it in my hand, heavy. Honest. What are you asking me for? I said finally. Greer didn't tally a request like a billowed. She let the silence set the shape of it. Then, a phone I can ring that you will pick up when the filter lights. Not for every fire. For the ones where the water dies if we don't carry a box across a river by hand. For when analog is the only language the stubborn world understands, on your terms. On your time, with me asking, not the machine. With you allowed to say no. I will put that in writing on paper if paper makes you feel like this is not a seduction. I drank the bottom of my coffee and tasted last night's development of courage. You will put it in writing that you will never hand my address to a man who calls himself a service. I said, I will write that and I will staple it to my own door, she said. I stood. My legs argued but they got up. I put out my hand and we shook like 2 women who understand that contracts are for governments and vows are for people who have to live with themselves. Okay, I said. But it's not a vow like the last one. That one said never. This one says when. When, she repeated softly. That's all a country is, sometimes. People deciding when. Not always. Just enough. We worked the rest of the morning like old neighbors. She at the fence with a come-along and a new chain. Me at the barn with rags and a bucket making the beach's nose glass honestly clear again. Both of us at the hives for a minute, listening to the gossip hysterical creatures make when they've lived through thunder. When we got hungry, I fried eggs and she buttered toast that tasted like a fair we didn't have energy to attend. Rourke. Arrived afternoon, clean shirt, the tree again, carrying a paper roll. From Ajay, he said, unspooling a children's drawing of a ventilator with a heart next to it and a scrawl that said, "Get some sleep." He set it on my table like a relic, and for a minute we let ourselves be the kind of people who cry while drinking water. We didn't talk about the bored men until after we had washed dishes with snowmalt and elbow grease. Then Greer told me a name that might not be a name. Quaid. He swaps them, she said. He has 6. The license goes away, the face stays. He's been practicing on small counties for 2 years. He thinks testing edges is a personality. He thinks if he can get the sky to wink at him, he's a god. Tell him the sky is a woman with a job, I said. She winks for men she chooses. In the next valley, a flare of sirens went by at a respectable speed. Somewhere a child laughed. Because sirens are exciting when they are not coming to your house. The world kept not asking our permission to be itself. In the middle of the afternoon, the creek carried down a torn plastic bag that caught on a root and flapped like a foolish flag. I went with a stick and freed it, then carried it to my burn barrel, and the simple act of moving a dumb thing from where it could harm to where it could be forgotten felt like the best metaphor for government we would ever deserve. Toward evening, Greer left with promises and no timeline because promises with timelines are what liars hand out. Rourke stayed another hour and fixed a hinge that had bothered me for 2 years without my admitting it. Before he left, he touched the beach's prop and said, "If she ever wants to stretch her legs, call me. I like riding an old bravery." I nodded and did not confess that the sentence warmed a place in me I had claimed was fully occupied by Cale. And solitude. When silence came for real at the end of a long day, it was not the kind that presses. It was the kind that sets a hand on your back in the kitchen and says, "Keep going." I put the new chain through the gate and shut it. I put the key fob on a hook by the door where I would forget it until the day I needed to be the kind of person. Who knows exactly where it hangs? I stood in the yard, the last light of the day braided into the alders, the bees tucking themselves in their wooden cities, and I listened to the sky. It said what it always says to people who have argued with. It and one enough to justify the argument. I will always be here. You will not. Use me well and then go home. The call that made the choice permanent came a week later, just before dawn. The hour when the body does not yet have a job and will take almost any assignment. I was up because bees wake as if they have appointments. And I wanted to watch their little gold bodies count the minutes before sun. The phone on the hook, my hook now, not the bottom of a drawer, buzzed two short, one long. Greer's code we had chosen because conductors use it to tell a train it's okay to move. "Hallie," I said. Her voice came through tinny and holy at once, the way voices do when they are carrying other people's air. "There's a storm on the channel and an organ on the tarmac," she said without preface. One of the UK birds had a censored disagreement over the Irish Sea and went to sleep on the water. RAF is busy where RAF is always busy. There's a donor heart at Stansted that needs to be in Glasgow in 4. The nets are still hiccuping. The only thing that will mind is a prop with an attitude and a pilot who can read over water when the compass sulks. We can get you a short body and a flight plan nobody will check because paper still believes itself, even when computers don't. You'd be with a surgeon and a kid who thinks jokes are courage. Will you go? I looked at my bees. They had already forgiven the night and were making a list of flowers. I looked at my beach. She sat in the morning like a woman waiting on a porch for a bus that might not come, and didn't matter because the chair was good. I felt for the old vow I had hung on a nail and found it where it belonged. An antique you keep because it reminds you of the person you were, a person who needed a no. The person I was now needed a when. "Yes," I said, and the word did not feel like a betrayal. It felt like work. "I'll send the truck," Greer said. "Pack light. Bring your hands." I hung up and stood there while the day climbed over my shoulder. I went to the hives and told them I would be back before they'd missed me. I wrote a note for the neighbor kid who sometimes watered my kale when I did the once-a-month resupply in town. It said, "If you don't hear my smoker in 3 days, check on the girls. There is a jar of honey under the cedar box for your trouble." I went to the barn and opened the doors, and the smell of oil and leather rose to greet me like memory that hadn't soured. I did my walk around with the deliberate tenderness I reserve for things that have kept me alive, fuel caps snug, tires telling the truth about their air, control surfaces hinged without complaint, pitot cover laying where it ought to so I could put it back where it shouldn't be, a little smear of oil wiped clean so I could catch a new one honest. Inside, the seat felt like a question I could answer. I ran a hand along the glare shield and then nicked the shape of Colorado. "You're going to cross an ocean today," I told her, "just not all of it at once." By 9 I was watching my hill go small from the back window of a state truck. The driver a deputy who'd grown up 2 miles from where my bees drank and now carried a stupid black rifle because men who didn't know my creek thought they needed to see him holding a stupid black rifle. He didn't talk. I didn't either. We don't do that when we have decided to move a heart through the world. At Trout the mule looked like a car after a wedding ribbon on her aerial, smudges of hands, a note stuck under a wheel chalk that said, Don't be a stranger. I patted her nacelle and told her she would miss me more than I would her, and then lied to me about that. The road took us to a bigger airport, and then a bigger one. And the bigger ones have rooms where men in shirts say numbers to each other that translate into people not dying. Greer met me with a folder and a new set of keys I didn't want but took because the day had already decided they would be mine. The airplane on the tarmac was not mine, and yet I knew her the way you know a cousin you have never met because your grandma talked about her knees. A King Air clean, analog enough not to get huffy when the storm jittered the satellites. The surgeon was smaller than her bag and carried herself like a person who has made the floor clean with her own hands and expects everyone to do the same. The kid was 22 with a grin that should have been illegal on a day like this. His name was Malik, and he made a joke about turbulence and puke bags, and then blushed and promised not to do that again. We crossed a piece of the world, and then another. And in the green between the grays, I remembered that water was always old. And people were always new, and the combination of those two facts is why we get out of bed when the phone rings. At Stansted, the Heart was a cooler with 2 nurses attached by invisible strings. At Glasgow, there was a man with years in his eyes who took it and said a prayer. I had heard in Spanish and English and Gaelic in cockpit. We flew back with nothing but the echo of purpose in the cabin. Over the channel, a hole in the sky opened, and the light poured through like an excuse. Malik leaned forward and tapped my shoulder and said, "Did you always know you'd be the person who goes when people ask?" He wasn't trying to make a speech. He just wanted to be sure people like me exist on purpose. "No," I said. I knew I didn't want to be the person who ran away when I heard a voice I respected. "When do you know if you respect it?" He asked. "When it asks me for something expensive and doesn't lie about the price." When I came back to my hill, my gate still had its chain. My bees had made a new map. My neighbor kid had left the jar of honey, empty of thanks, and a note that said, "You weren't gone long enough to miss." I sat on the stoop with the key fob in my hand and the sat phone on the hook and the creak telling me to stop dramatizing. To drink water. I had put my vow down. I had picked up a different one. It was lighter and fit better, and still bit now and then like an old boot that hummed. It went like this: I will not make emergencies my personality. I will not let boredom wear a badge in my head. I will not let men who call themselves services define my work. I will go when the door is truly open and someone I respect is on the other side holding a bucket. And then I will go home and feed the bees. The filter would ring again. The bored man would knock in my head again, perhaps once more on my gate. The sky would decide it was a woman with a job and give me a window and take it away. Water would go on being holy and need to be defended from men who say it's just a utility. My hands would not stop moving until my bones told them they could. Put my palm on the beach that evening, the way I had on the mule's flank, and said, quietly so the ravens couldn't make a joke of it, "We love what we can carry. We carry what we love. And when we can't carry it, we leave it where good people can find it." The next morning I split wood by sound again, pitch from green, truth from lie, and when the phone whispered too short, one long, I picked it up. Before the second long, I had things to do. The world had to be mended again with tape, truth, and stubbornness. I would be late for my own funeral if there were parts to fly and water to sweeten. Between now and then, that is not how the story ends, because stories like this pretend to end but only circle back over places we need to see more than once. But for tonight, for this telling, it ends here. In a valley where a creek has opinions, in a barn where an old airplane smells like work, with a gate that still closes and a woman who opens it only when the voice is right. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.